Okay, so today's video is going to be short because I'm exhausted and I have a lot to do, but I do highly recommend Madeline Pendleton's podcast, which is called Pick Me Up, I'm Scared. I don't know what's happening with the lighting, so I'm going to put the link down below. It is available on Spotify and, anywhere where podcasts are available. I've actually been using Podbean. I think it's not a huge platform, but it works for me. And I've just been trying to listen to the School of America's episodes, and I just can't emotionally take it in. Every time I get to some parts, I just need to pause to cry and just emotionally process some of the things that Madeline and David are talking about, because it's a lot. It's a lot to take in. And trigger warning, there is a lot of violent and sexual assault and all types of actions mentioned in those podcasts. And generally, the School of Americas was a project ran by the CIA to crush any type of a leftist-leaning movement in Central America. And it operated, it still operates, I think, actually. I'm not going to try and retell the stuff to you. I do recommend you just go on and give it a listen. I think there are 2 episodes, and they're a little bit on the longer side. They're like 2 hours or so each, or an hour and a half each, but it is really worth a listen, even though I myself haven't finished them. But maybe you are not going to be like me, having to stop every few minutes to just blow your eyeballs out, and maybe you'll be able to listen to it all. There's also a huge list of links that Madeline provides that she uses as her resources, which I do appreciate. So you can look at some of this information if you don't want to listen or if you don't have time to listen. But I do recommend this to Americans specifically because it is essential for Americans to learn about what their government has done to the people outside of the US and to the people in the US as well. Madeline's podcast deals with all issues that are related to the crimes of the US government. So the MOVE bombings is there. This episode was very educational for me as a person living outside of the US as well. So I do highly recommend you check these out because they're very highly informative. There are a lot of sources that actually, many of them are just Western sources that derive the information straight from the CIA's declassified archives. And I've been thinking personally as to why the CIA has been declassifying all those crimes and kind of telling on themselves. Because many people, when they are faced with this information, they have the same question. They're like, why would they tell on themselves? Why would they admit to all these terrible crimes against humanity? Why would they admit to having murdered thousands upon thousands of innocent civilians and, to torture and rape and all kinds of unthinkable acts? And personally, I have a few hypotheses as to why. One is hiding in plain sight, which is if you make information freely available to the public, you're not really hiding it, right? So it's there. You're not denying it. You can all go and look and read those archives yourselves. But a lot of times people don't think to do that. How many times a day does an ordinary quote-unquote person goes on to the CIA website to read about their crimes? And because it's so saturated with information, if you are just randomly there out of curiosity, just poking around, you may not stumble upon some of the worst stuff to begin with. So hiding in plain sight like this, I think, is a pretty good strategy because many people will not be looking at this information, and it's not going to be as scandalous as if there was an independent journalist who uncovered some of these facts and then published them in a magazine or a newspaper or online, because then there would be this element of mystery, right? Element of a secret being revealed. So people are a little bit more interested usually in looking into the mysteries and something that others are trying to hide. So when you have your information freely available like this, it's not as scandalous. Or is the word scandalous? I can't remember, but yeah, I think it's actually scandalous. So when the stories about what the CIA has done do get published in national magazines like the New Yorker or the New York Times, they're not as interesting. They don't draw as much attention of the general public. People, of course, are going to be exposed to this information and become aghast and be like, oh my goodness, why would they do that? But it's not going to have as much of an atmosphere of a mystery that often draws many people in. And I think there have been quite a few books published about some of the crimes the CIA committed. The Jakarta Method, I think, was one of the most famous ones. I have not read it, so even though it's been on the list of to read literature for me for some time now, but I've heard mentions of it here and there, and mentions to what the CIA has done in Indonesia. But it's very famous. It's one of these works that has become one of the most radicalizing pieces, I think, of literature in the last period of time. I'm not sure how long this book has been around, and I think there are a few other volumes that have been published uncovering some of the CIA crimes. So to the CIA to admit to having committed these crimes is kind of to counter some of that sensationalism that otherwise surrounds such works. So I think that hiding in plain sight is a very valid hypothesis. They also have to declassify certain documents because, and this is what I've learned from Madeleine, because the other government services and government agencies don't know what the CIA is doing. The FBI famously has been investigating these series of crimes, and they ultimately led to the CIA, and in the end they wasted a ton of resources. So communication between agencies is another valid reason as to why the CIA publishes these documents, declassifies those documents, so that there is somewhat of a communication in between all these agencies. Another one of my hypotheses that I think can be quite plausible is that it is working to scare the population, because when you start reading when you start looking into that data, you just become horrified. It is such terrifying information to learn, especially for a person who is in the United States. I can imagine just how terrifying it must be to read about all of these crimes having been committed by your government without any kind of repercussions. And it is scary. It is truly terrifying. And I understand that a lot of people may just be scared out of trying to do anything afterwards, because they will think that, and sometimes rightfully so, that these agencies like the CIA are going to come after them and just murder them and not even worry about it, because that's what they've been doing for years and years and years. It's nothing new. They're very much used to it. This is a tool in their toolbox that they have been using, and they're not ashamed of it. They're not even ashamed to admit it and put it out there on the internet for everyone to be able to access it easily. So I think that can be a pretty decent strategy as well. You can let me know what your hypotheses are, but I do highly recommend you check out Madeleine's podcast, because it is so highly informative. I love Madeleine as a person so much. She's on TikTok as well if you prefer like shorter videos, and she does great breakdowns of huge chunks of data. She reads a lot, and I do highly recommend her TikTok channel and her podcast. I've actually been thinking about recording a podcast myself for a while, just doing some long form ranting and raving, which I really love to do, but I have no strength left in me to do anything. So I don't know, maybe in the future when I recover a little bit, I will start a podcast as well. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you would be interested in an hour of me just yapping at you. But meanwhile, listen to Madeleine's podcast. Do take care of yourself and your community. I hope you have a great day. Consider supporting me on Patreon, and I will talk to you sometime later.